Um, Still on where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Martin Luther King Jr. Something I want you to notice, the name on here. I find it ironic that the civil rights leaders many times were known as Martin Luther King, as written on this book, Huey P. Newton, Angela Davis, and not Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Huey P. Newton, or Dr. Angela Davis. I think that kind of speaks for itself. No matter who's watching this video, that's a fact. I had a few people comment, well, you are the race card. It's not a race card. That's just a fact. Look up Huey P. Newton. See if it says Dr. Huey P. Newton. Because Angela Davis is still alive and is still an active scholar, and times have moved on now that we say Dr. Cornel West, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, so she's moved into this generation. But if you look up Angela Davis in the 60s, it will not say, or 70s or 80s, it will not say Dr. Angela Davis unless it's something directly scholastic. Just imagery is very important historically. But we had talked about, we had moved into the foreword, and the foreword in this book, again, is by Coretta Scott King. And she was talking about Dr. King and said he made discrimination and poverty the central focus of his attacks. In his work, he stresses the common cause of all disinherited white and black, laying the basis of contemporary struggles now unfolding around economic issues, not civil issues. So the main point in the civil rights movement was the cause and effect were off. There was a civil resolution being made for a economic problem. Dr. King is now moving toward a economic resolution to an economic problem. But we needed the civil rights movement to teach us that, because what was in our face was the lack of civility, but the system was not evident when the system was financial. Racism is a system, not an incident. Again, that's from White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo's book. And Dr. King went further because, as we talked about race and racists in the last video, he was not a racist. He brought this on a broad national scale. Even as he spoke and wrote those words, Dr. King recognized that the danger they carried, he knew that there were many black and white allies and supporters of his organization and the larger freedom and justice movement who considered it unwise, unpatriotic, and unnecessary provocation to combine the call for legal and economic rights at home with profound questioning of foreign policy of the federal government, whose assistance was considered essential in the achievement of civil rights. There's another comment directly about the Vietnam War. There's the combination of the Vietnam War was a major problem, but to quote Malcolm X, He said, I am for right, no matter who is telling it or who benefits from it. And that was at the core of Dr. King's philosophy as well. Say, no, it's not do right for black folks. It's not do right for black folks that don't have no money. Do right for everybody that don't have no money. Don't just help the black disenfranchised people, the Native American, all disenfranchised people. And I do find room for racists in that argument, because everyone is not subscribing to that philosophy. So they're accepting the benefits of black people, including them alleged minorities, women. It's more women than there are anybody else. So women are not a minority, but they were considered a social minority. And they became the beneficiaries of the affirmative action, not black folks, disproportionately white women, disproportionately the gay and lesbian movement. In fact, the predecessor to Kennedy would not sign it until gender and gay and lesbian phraseology was added to that, because there are more gay and lesbian white people. There are more white women. So what they did was diverted the funds and benefits to white people. Well, it's not white people, it's gay and lesbian. They're part of the thing. Well, it's not white people, it's women. Even though white women built the suffrage movement on the cooperation of black women like Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. But once they got their equality in 1920, they fought for the next 44 years against black women getting it. In fact, it was Susan B. Anthony that said, I would cut off my right arm before I support a nigger getting the chance to vote before white women. In nigger, she didn't say nigger men. That included in her representation, nigger women. So that being the case, where are we? Chapter 1, Dr. King is setting me straight, because I was a big, I criticized the civil rights movement. I basically taught and told people that it was worthless. It was not what it was represented as in history, especially by black people. It was relatively ineffective. It completely missed the mark in its understanding of the issue and its attempt at resolution. Nothing really occurred any different. Like I said, they just restated the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that they hadn't been following, and subsequently have not followed the last two, the 64 and 65 Acts. And it was never about civility. It was always about money and assets. And I was not aware that that revelation of truth had come to the especially nonviolent people in the civil rights movement. He begins off explaining how it was a success. The things that we needed to find out that made it clear to people like me, this is not personal. this is about money, came about through appealing to moral suasion. It came about clearing the fact that this is not about moral suasion. It's not about people doing good things. This is about people doing the right thing. And the right thing is economic. Good things is civil. So he listed out how the nonviolent and civil discourse uncovered what is known now as that's the problem. Okay. So he moves into, for the vast majority of white Americans, the past decade, the first phase had been a struggle to treat the Negro with decency, not of equality. And where I had the biggest trouble with this was this commitment lodged in the belief that white people in general, the larger majority of whites, had any ability of egalitarian consideration. There's nothing historically to make us think that that was possible or probable. And to continue appealing to a group of people that for hundreds of years, thousands, if we're looking at world history, never has shown any evidence that they were a people that the outcome that the civil rights nonviolent movement was looking for was even possible, because they never shared authority or willingly shared power. In fact, they have functioned as a majority to the complete opposite. And even in the minority that didn't, that's where we go back to from doing the good thing to doing the right thing. So there was really very little basis in the goal that was set of shame to the point of correcting behavior. It's just, the United States system works fine. A lot of people say our system is broken. It's not broken. It works perfectly for those to which it's supposed to work for. White America was all ready to demand that the Negro should be spared the lash of brutality and the course of degradation, but it has never been truly committed to helping the Negro out of poverty. This is where he's pulling it around now. This is where he's pulling it around. And if you don't read what he said, if you're not reading his books, we don't know that this is probably ultimately what got him killed. As long as he was talking about, let's be friends, please stop hitting me and I won't hit you back, the government allowed him to live. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, when he started talking about money, he had to go. And he said, well, there's no proof that the government shot him. They got the guy that shot him. Okay, number one, at least for 13 years, he was being followed daily, around the clock, by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. COINTELPRO papers, all of this is documented. This is not a question. Read it. How can someone who the FBI is monitoring 24 hours a day gets killed. There's no FBI people to jump out of the trees and help them get to the hospital, to immediately catch the person. Nothing. Same thing with Malcolm X. Same thing with Medgar Evers. Same thing with Fred Hampton. And we found the paperwork with Fred Hampton where the FBI had coordinated that. We know that there is paperwork in the COINTELPRO papers that said that they were trying to get Martin Luther King to try to commit suicide because they knew that he had a propensity toward suicide and depression. So, white segregationists and ordinary white citizens had more in common with one another than they had with the Negro. That is the basis under which white supremacy functions to create that reality. So even white people that think that are basically more so in the same boat, poor white people are they're closer to the disenfranchised black people than they are to the elites that run the country. And if you go back to Bacon's Rebellion in 1686 and 1676 and the subsequent anti-miscegenation laws, you'll actually see how lower class whiteness was purposefully distinguished from the all other minorities systematically to avoid revolt that happened with Bacon's Rebellion. Whiteness before 1682 did not exist. It was like the word Southern. There was no class associated. There was no benefit associated with that description before then. Whiteness was made in 1682, the anti-miscegenation laws, and that is why white Americans left the Negro on the ground and in devastating numbers walked off with the aggressor. It appeared that the white segregationist and the ordinary white citizen had more in common with one another than they had with the Negro. When Negroes looked for the second phase of the civil rights movement, the realization of equality, they found that many of their white allies had quietly disappeared. Negroes of America had taken the president, the press, and the pulpit at their word, and they spoke in broad terms of freedom and justice. What they found out was the same thing Frederick Douglass found out, where many of his white supporters moved away from him after the 13th Amendment was put in place, because Frederick Douglass said, hey, now we got to move toward equality. It's no, I said you shouldn't be a slave. I never said you were equal. There's a difference in white Americans relinquishing their white privilege and saying we shouldn't spray them with water hoses, or we shouldn't sick dogs on them, or we shouldn't systematically disenfranchise them, stop them from getting jobs, miseducate them, undereducate them. They should be given the same shot. But I don't want to destroy the system that gives me the advantage. And any person who is aware of the history of the United States, that for hundreds of years, we have been a slave country much longer than we've been a quote unquote free country, because we're not a free country. Now, obviously, we still have slavery by way of the 13th Amendment. And that's why we have the prison industrial complex, and it disproportionately affects the same people who were disproportionately affected by slavery. So that being the case, we're going to continue into chapter 1 and really get into the economic discrimination, calls for equality as Dr. King saw it. And then more importantly, it's going to begin to move into the Black Power movement, how it came about, how Dr. King felt it was effective or non-effective.